Hello everyone, this is Michelle Lupton for Picket Studios, and I'm going to show you how I made a variation on this card. So I'm starting with this new stamp set called Lilies for Spring, which is part of the March release from Picket Studios. Now in the card that I've already made, that I just showed you, I did some ink smooshing, then I embossed onto the edges and added a little bit more colour with some Copic markers, and then I added a sentiment that I white embossed onto vellum. Now I did most of that the same for this card, but I sort of veered off the guidelines towards the end, but I started off pretty similar. So what I'm doing here is I have the stamp, I've inked it up in Versamark ink, which is a clear sticky ink, so that will allow me to use embossing powder. And I'm going to use white embossing powder for this one. So what I did was I positioned the stamp so I could stamp in each corner. So at the moment I've got the top right and the bottom left because I just rotated my cardstock, kept the stamp in the same position. And now I'm adding some of my white embossing powder. And I won't bore you with all of the heating up that happened for this card. There was lots of heat embossing, so heat setting with my heat tool, so I'm going to cut that out for you right now, and also lots of drying for the distress oxide inks that I used as well. But you can see now I'm placing the stamp again because I had the stamp in the top right and that gave me the bottom left, but now I have to do the opposite. So I ended up with a border on either side of these lilies. And now I'm going to use some distress oxide. I've got scattered straw, worn lipstick, picked raspberry and wilted violet in distress oxide inks. Now for the first card I think I skipped the scattered straw. So it wasn't quite as warm toned, this scattered straw on the first layer. And you can see I'm actually going to remove a bit of this colour because I thought it was just a bit too intense. It's just to give a bit of a warmth to the background. And then I went in straight with some worn lipstick over the top of that without even heat setting it. So you can see I didn't add as much water for the pink because I wanted the yellow to be a bit of a wash in the background, so I used a lot of water. But all the rest of the colours, I wanted them pretty splotchy. And I also wanted them around the edge, so you'll be able to see that when I dunk it, I'm sort of dunking the two edges, the left and right edges of this watercolour cardstock. This is, by the way, Canson watercolour paper that I'm using here. And then when I did the purple, I decided that I didn't want to do ink smooshing because I didn't really want very much of it. So I just squished a bit of the purple and a bit of the hot pink, the picked raspberry, and I'm just splattering it with my paintbrush here to get a few sort of more intense colour splatters here and there, but not too much purple. I am going to be adding a fair amount of purple a bit later on, but with my Copic markers. Now here is the first place where I veered off course. I decided that I wanted a little bit of gold on this. So I've got my Perfect Pearls powder. I'm just using my little paint sort of spatula thingy to get some of that powder off, and I'm just going to mix that up with some water and again use my paintbrush to just splatter that on the background. It doesn't make a huge difference when you look at the whole card, but up close it adds some lovely shine and a little bit more detail with that gold. You can see that there, that shine as it catches the light is just lovely. I thought it went well with the bit more yellow that I've got in the background. Now with this Copic colouring that I'm going to do, some people don't like to do this technique because when you colour over the top of embossing powder, and I'm using white embossing powder here, you get a bit of residue on the tip of your Copic marker. And some people don't like that, and that's perfectly fine. I have never found that it really alters the function of my Copic markers. People who are better at Copic colouring might find that it does for them, and that's fine. If you are a bit worried about using your Copic markers over embossing, that's fine. You could do the same technique just with some watercolour markers. So I could have pulled out my Zig markers and done the same thing just with a bit of water blending. Now here's the second time that I went a little bit off-piste. I decided I wanted a different sentiment. I also wanted the card to be landscape instead of portrait. Now, I originally thought I might use the congratulations, but then I thought, I think I might just want to stamp it straight onto the card rather than embossing onto vellum like I did with the original card. And this is where it went a little bit wrong. First of all, what I'm doing here, this stamp is unused. I've never used it before this time. So quite often when I have a brand new stamp, when I put ink on it, you can actually see that the ink is beading up a little bit. So what I tend to do is add ink a few times and clean it off. And then you can see I'm rubbing my fingers onto it, and then the ink will stick a whole lot better to the stamp. I still might need to stamp 1 or 2 times, but that's okay. However, in between the first and the second stamping, the little tail on the right-hand side of my stamp moved on my Misty. Some of the water must have got underneath and it wasn't sticking to the lid of the Misty as well as it could have. So, yeah, my stamping of the sentiment was no good, so I just stamped the sentiment and die cut it out. I actually die cut the white piece first and then stamped onto it so I could line it up better. And I'm going to adhere that over the top of my dodgy stamping. So you can see there's always a way of saving a card, and I was just very, very lucky that the oopsie daisy bit of my bad stamping was covered up perfectly by just that little border that this die gives to this stamp. And I actually quite like the way that the sentiment stands out a little bit more when you've got it on that white panel there. Now I decided that I wasn't quite finished. I quite often decide, oh, am I finished? Am I finished? No, I'm not. I need some sequins. So I pulled out my favourite Picket fence sequins. This mix is called Gin and Tonic, and I use it on so many cards it's just not funny. So once I added those, my card was finished, and I'm going to show you a comparison between what I was planning to do and what I actually ended up doing. I hope you enjoyed my process video, and thank you very, very much for watching. Bye!